The cold light of Massachusetts General Hospital slid through the thin curtain, casting a pale glow onto the stark white walls of room 507. The heart monitor emitted steady beeps, a rhythmic pulse that had echoed for 5 years. At the center of the room, on a hospital bed, surrounded by tubes and medical equipment, Edward Harrington lay motionless. His face, once sharp and commanding, now bore a false sense of peace, the product of a deep sleep that had imprisoned him since that fateful night. 5 years. Long enough for the outside world to change, for empires to fall, for promises to break. But in this room, time seemed frozen. Only the sound of machines and Edward's faint breath were reminders that he was still alive, though merely a shadow of the man he once was. Clara, the morning shift nurse, entered with a clipboard in hand. She checked Edward's vitals as usual, her eyes sweeping over him with no expectation. 5 years of caring for a comatose patient had numbed her to the silence. She recorded the numbers, unaware that Edward's right finger had twitched a slight, almost invisible movement, as if he were trying to pull himself from the darkness. The second movement was more pronounced. Edward's eyelids fluttered like a butterfly struggling free from its cocoon. His breathing, previously, even thanks to the ventilator, began to falter. Clara froze mid-note, her gaze locked onto his face. No way, she whispered, then hurriedly pressed the intercom. "Dr. Hayes, come to room 507 immediately." Her voice echoed through the hallway, laced with panic and a flicker of hope. Within minutes, the door burst open. Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, a renowned neurologist overseeing Edward's case from the beginning, led a team into the room. Edward began to thrash his body, instinctively resisting the intubation tube down his throat. "He's breathing on his own." "Doctor," Hayes declared, her calm voice betraying her excitement. "Prepare to extubate." The procedure was swift but tense. As the tube was removed, Edward coughed harshly, his eyes slowly opening. The once vivid blue of his irises now appeared hazy under the harsh hospital lights, blinking rapidly to adjust. He tried to move, but his body, atrophied after 5 years of stillness, refused to obey. Pain radiated through him like 1,000 needles piercing his skin. "Mr. Harrington, can you hear me?" Dr. Hayes bent closer, her voice clear. "If you understand me, blink twice." Edward summoned every ounce of remaining strength. His eyes blinked slowly but deliberately. Twice. A wave of relief swept over the medical team. Clara brought over ice chips, placing them gently on his lips. He sucked them in, the cold easing his parched throat. "Ooh. Where?" He rasped, his voice hoarse, almost unrecognizable. Dr. Hayes exchanged glances with the team before answering. "Mr. Harrington, you're at Massachusetts General Hospital, Boston. You were in a serious accident. You've been in a coma for 5 years." The words hit Edward like a blow to the chest. 5 years. He struggled to process the information, his mind spinning. What had become of Harrington Industries, the financial empire he had built from nothing? Did any of his relationships, plans, or dreams still exist? He tried to lift his hand, but only trembling fingers responded. The helplessness gripped his chest like a vice. At that moment, memories flashed through his mind, like an old film reel. Before the accident, Edward was more than just a millionaire. He had once been a man of ideals. At 20, he launched Harrington Gardens, a low-income housing project in Augusta, Georgia, hoping to give struggling families a home. He remembered letters of thanks from single mothers and the hugs from children stepping into a real house for the first time. But pressure from Boston's elite and his harsh father, a businessman who saw profit as the only measure of success, gradually led Edward to abandon those ideals. He became a money-making machine, building an empire out of ambition and emotional distance. Now, lying in the hospital bed, regret crept in. What had he traded away to gain that power? And now that he was awake, was anyone left still standing by him? "We'll need to run more tests," Dr. Hayes continued, pulling Edward back to the present. "Your memory seems intact, but your body will need time to recover. We'll begin physical therapy as soon as you stabilize." Edward gave a faint nod, his gaze drifting around the room. Clara was making notes, but she let slip one detail. "She brought flowers again this morning," she said to another nurse, voice low but within Edward's hearing. "That Maya woman hasn't missed a single week in 5 years." "Maya," Edward whispered too softly for Clara to hear, but the name etched itself into his mind. Who was Maya? None bore that name among the hundreds of employees, partners, and friends that once filled his world. So why would a stranger visit him weekly, bringing fresh flowers and holding him in memory? Dr. Hayes noticed the curiosity in his eyes. "Someone has cared deeply for you, Mr. Harrington," she said gently. "A woman named Maya Johnson. She works at your estate. She isn't like the others." Edward furrowed his brow, trying to search his memory, but came up empty. A strange feeling rose within him, part intrigue, part unease. In his world, loyalty always comes with a price. What did Maya Johnson want from a man who had lost everything? "Your lawyer, Mr. James Carter, will be coming tomorrow," Dr. Hayes added. "He has much to update you on. For now, you should rest." As the medical team filed out, Edward remained eyes fixed on the ceiling. Outside the window, Boston's city lights shimmered in the night. 5 years ago, he was a man at the peak closing billion-dollar deals, surrounded by flattery and admiration. Now, he was a shell fragile and alone, haunted by one question. What had become of the world outside? And who was Maya Johnson in his story? Inside him, a faint flicker of hope stirred, mingled with fear. If everything he'd built had crumbled, was anything worth waking for? And if Maya Johnson was the answer, would she lead him back into the light, or a different kind of darkness? The pale morning light filtered through the window of room 507, casting a faint glow across Edward Harrington's ashen face. He lay motionless on the hospital bed, his deep blue eyes fixed on the ceiling, as if trying to find answers in the invisible cracks above. The steady beeping of the heart monitor no longer sounded like the rhythm of life, but rather a cruel reminder of the 5 years he had lost. 5 years of void, vast enough to swallow an empire. The door opened quietly. Clara, the nurse on his morning shift, stepped in with a middle-aged man in a tailored gray suit. James Carter, Edward's longtime attorney, carried a black leather briefcase and a hesitant smile. "Edward, you're awake," James said, his voice trembling with emotion though his eyes revealed worry. "I've waited so long for this day." Edward gave a weak nod, his throat still raw from the ventilator. He gestured toward Clara, and she quickly set a glass of ice water on the bedside table. "Talk to me, James," Edward rasped, voice hoarse and cracked. "What happened?" James sat beside the bed, opened his briefcase, and pulled out a stack of documents. He took a deep breath, as if preparing to drop a bomb. "Edward, I need you to brace yourself. Harrington Industries is gone." The words hit Edward like a blade to the chest. He blinked, trying to process. "Gone," he repeated, voice unsteady. How is that possible?" James lowered his head, avoiding eye contact. "Nathan Brooks, your business partner, manipulated everything. After your accident, he claimed the company was on the brink of collapse. He redirected investment funds, sold off shares, and drove Harrington Industries into bankruptcy within months. It was one of the largest financial scandals in recent years. Do you remember the Dubai projects? He embezzled billions from those deals." Edward felt his blood surge. Nathan Brooks, his best friend from college, the man he had once called a brother. He remembered the late nights drinking whiskey, making plans for an empire that would never fall. Nathan. Edward whispered, his hand tightening around the bedsheet. What else did he do? James hesitated, then continued. There's more. Olivia. Olivia Bennett, your fiancée. She married Nathan 3 years ago. They've been living in your Cape Cod estate funded by his stolen money. The betrayal from Olivia landed harder than any blow. Edward shut his eyes, and the image of the $1 million engagement ring he'd once given her flashed in his mind. The promises of forever, the plans they had made, it was all a lie. Olivia, he murmured, voice thick with bitterness. She never loved me, did she? James didn't answer right away. But his silence said everything. He flipped to another page, attempting to steer the conversation elsewhere. And Sophia, your sister, she sold her shares the moment Nathan took control. She's living in Dubai now and is married to an oil tycoon. I've tried reaching out, but she won't take my calls. Edward's chest tightened. Sophia, the sister, he had paid med school tuition for gifted luxury cars to protect it from their cold, demanding father. He had foolishly hoped that she would stay and fight for him, but she too had abandoned him as if he were nothing but a burden. So that's it, Edward said quietly, though a storm raged beneath the surface. My company, my fiancé, my sister, all gone, all. He let out a hollow laugh, dry and lifeless. What do I have left? James placed a hand gently on his shoulder, offering what comfort he could. Not everything is lost. The Beacon Hill mansion is still yours, protected by a clause in your will. And there's an offshore account Nathan couldn't touch. Roughly $2 million. Not much compared to what you had, but enough to start again. $2 million. Edward repeated, a bitter smile curling at his lips. $2 million, a pitiful sum compared to the billions he once controlled. He remembered the lavish galas, the private jets, the handshakes with politicians and moguls. Now he was just a broken man in a hospital bed, imprisoned in a body that barely obeyed him. Then something else caught his attention. Dr. Hayes mentioned a name, he said, eyes narrowing. Maya Johnson. Who is she? James frowned as if the name puzzled him. Maya Johnson. She's a housekeeper at your estate. A black woman started working for you a few months before the accident. I'm not sure why, but she stayed. She kept the mansion running like it was her own. She's been bringing flowers here every week. For 5 years. Honestly, I can't explain her motives. Edward felt a strange emotion stir, half curiosity, half suspicion. In his world, no one did anything without a reason. A housekeeper, a woman he couldn't remember why, would she devote her youth to caring for a man who might never wake up? What does she want? He asked coldly. James shrugged. Loyalty, maybe, or something else. But Edward, I urge caution. People like her, they don't belong in our world. There was a subtle prejudice in James's tone, and Edward frowned. He didn't like what James had said, and people liked her, but he didn't argue. In Edward's mind, Boston's elite had continuously operated along invisible lines, class, race, and power. With her unfamiliar name and lowly role, Maya Johnson clearly did not belong. And yet, it was her unfamiliarity that haunted him most. While Nathan, Olivia, and Sophia, those he trusted most, had betrayed him, this stranger had stayed. Why? The question gnawed at him, a sliver of light in the darkness of loss. You need to rest, James said, standing as he gathered the documents. I'll return tomorrow. We'll talk about the next steps. You will recover Edward. I believe in you." As James left, Edward lay motionless, eyes fixed on the window. Outside, Boston pulsed with light and motion, but the city felt distant to him, like a dream he no longer belonged to. He thought of Harrington Industries. In those days, he stood tall at the summit of power, commanding deals with unshakable confidence. But what surfaced more vividly were fleeting moments of real meaning, like the handwritten letter from a mother in Augusta weeping as she accepted the keys to a new home. Now it was all gone. All that remained was a vacant mansion, $2 million, and a name, Maya Johnson. Who was she? A loyal soul, or a quiet opportunist waiting for the right moment? Edward closed his eyes, trapped in a storm of helplessness and haunted intrigue. He knew that to reclaim his life, he would have to face not just what was lost, but the mysterious woman who had kept a part of him alive in the dark. The wrought iron gates of the Harrington estate on Beacon Hill appeared before Edward Harrington, gleaming under the pale autumn sunlight. The black Mercedes, not the armored one he once owned, stopped gently at the entrance. Sitting in the back seat, Edward gripped his cane tightly. Every step was a battle against his frail body, yet his eyes were sharp, scanning every detail of the house that had once stood as a symbol of his power and success. James Carter, his attorney, opened the car door and helped him out. "Careful," Edward James said, his voice warm, but tinged with tension. "I arranged for you to return today, but there's something you should know. Maya Johnson, the housekeeper, might be here. She comes 3 times a week to tend the place." Edward frowned. That name again? Maya Johnson echoed, like a riddle with no answer. "She's still here?" "After everything?" he asked, his voice hoarse, laced with suspicion. "Why?" James shrugged, uncertainty in his eyes. "I don't know, Edward. She's been using her salary to keep the house intact, covering maintenance, hiring gardeners, and even turning down investor offers. Honestly, I can't make sense of it. Maybe it's loyalty. Or maybe she's waiting for something." James's tone showed a trace of judgment, but Edward didn't respond. He had lived in a world where every gesture had a price, where loyalty was often a masked transaction. Maya Johnson, a woman he couldn't remember. Why would she sacrifice 5 years to protect a home without an owner? As they passed through the gate, a wave of emotion rose in Edward's chest. The Harrington mansion, with its timeless architecture and soaring windows, stood untouched by time. The front garden bloomed with vibrant yellow roses, the kind he'd planted as a promise to his mother when he was a boy. The scent of fresh-cut grass and blossoms drifted through the air, stopping him in his tracks. "I can't believe it," he whispered. "It's the same." James nodded. "That's Maya's doing. She wouldn't let anything change, not even the smallest details, like the angel statue in the garden corner. She kept it all." Edward turned toward the garden and saw her. A black woman, likely in her early 30s, knelt beside the yellow roses. She wore a simple white blouse and jeans, her curly hair tied back with a soft blue scarf. Her gloved hands moved gently, weeding the flower bed with a care that radiated love. There was a quiet grace in how she worked, as if the garden was an extension of herself. "That's Maya," James said softly, lowering his voice as if afraid to disturb the moment. "She doesn't know you're back today." Edward watched her in silence. Something about Maya held him, something beyond physical beauty, though she was undeniably attractive in a quiet, understated way. It was the devotion in her movements. She hummed a soft jazz tune, her lips moving gently, as if speaking to the flowers. He felt a fierce curiosity, tangled with the deep-rooted suspicion that had settled in him since the betrayals he'd recently uncovered. The sound of the car engine made Maya look up. She froze momentarily, as if she couldn't believe her eyes. Then slowly she removed her gloves, stood, and wiped her hands on her jeans. Her posture was cautious, yet quietly dignified. "Harrington," she said, her voice soft but clear, touched with a southern lilt. "Welcome home." Edward was caught off guard by her voice, a strange mix of respect and familiarity, as if she knew him more deeply than he knew her. "Miss Johnson," he replied stiffly, trying to keep his distance. "I was told you've cared for this place." Maya offered a small, unassuming smile, just enough to light up her face. "I was only doing my job, sir." She stepped aside, motioning toward the front door. "Please come in. Everything's just as you left it." Edward leaned on his cane, moving slowly toward the entrance. Maya walked beside him, instinctively matching her pace to his. That minor consideration startled him, not flashy or calculated, but meaningful. He was used to sycophantic gestures from assistants and business partners. But Maya's care felt different. It felt real. Inside the mansion, the scent of polished wood and a faint trace of lemon stopped Edward in his tracks. The grand living room retained its stately charm with its antique fireplace and family portraits. The mahogany desk where he once signed billion-dollar deals stood untouched, not a speck of dust on it. "How did you do it?" he asked, voice caught between wonder and doubt. 5 years. No me. No money from me. How? Maya lowered her gaze, glancing toward the garden through the tall windows. "I had a small team, gardeners, repairmen, people who believe in the value of this home. I used my salary, and sometimes I had to fight off people who tried to take it apart. There was a break-in once, but I called the police in time." Edward's brow furrowed. "Why? You owed me nothing. You worked here just a few months before the accident. Why sacrifice so much?" Maya hesitated, choosing her words. "Some things are worth preserving, sir," she said, calm but resolute. "This house, it's not just property. It's your legacy." Her words struck him. Legacy. He had always thought his legacy was Harrington Industries' bank balances and stock values. But Maya spoke of this house of yellow roses and childhood promises as though they held more meaning than an empire. James, still by the door, broke the moment. "Edward, I'll leave you to rest. I'll call later to go over the next steps." He gave Maya a guarded look. "Miss Johnson, thank you for everything." Maya nodded silently. When James left, a heavy silence settled between them. Edward looked at Maya, trying to read her eyes. "You turned down offers to sell," he said slowly. "Everyone else, Nathan, Olivia, Sophia, left me. But you stayed. Why?" Maya pressed her lips together, her gaze drifting back to the yellow roses. "I believed you would return," she said. "And I believed that a man who plants yellow roses for his mother deserves a place to return to." The words pierced through Edward's defenses. He remembered his mother, the gentle woman who had died when he was 12, leaving him to a father who worshipped only wealth. That promise, to plant her a rose garden, had been the most sacred vow he'd ever made. But he had buried it beneath ambition. How did Maya know? How could she understand the meaning behind those flowers? "What do you know about me?" he asked, his voice colder than he intended. Maya gave a soft smile, though a flicker of hurt passed through her eyes. "I know enough to stay," she replied, then turned away. "I'll make some tea. You still like Earl Grey with a slice of lemon, don't you?" Edward nodded, surprised. She remembered such a minor detail. He watched her disappear through the doorway, his curiosity tinged with a quiet shame. Maya Johnson wasn't just a housekeeper. She had preserved a part of him, one he had long forgotten. But could he truly trust her in a world built on betrayal and illusion? Or was she another player in a game whose rules he no longer understood? The sun was setting, casting a warm amber glow over the yellow rose garden of the Harrington estate. Edward Harrington sat in the living room, leaning on his cane, his eyes fixed on the window where the flowers swayed gently in the breeze. 5 days had passed since his return, and he still felt like a stranger in his home. His body was frail, his mind clouded, and his heart, once locked away by ambition, now trembled with a silent question. Who is Maya Johnson? She appeared every day, quietly going about her work, dusting old picture frames, tending to the garden, checking the door locks. But what Edward couldn't stop thinking about was the sincerity in her every action. No boasting. There is no expectation of praise, only quiet, unwavering devotion. In his world where everything had a price, such selflessness stirred curiosity and unease. That afternoon, when Maya brought in a tray of Earl Grey tea, Edward finally decided to break the silence. "Miss Johnson," he called, his voice hoarse but firm. "Sit for a moment. I want to speak with you." Maya paused, the tray trembling slightly in her hands. She set it on the table, her deep brown eyes brushing over him as though weighing something. "Sir, I still have work to finish," she replied gently, a hint of guardedness in her tone. "That can wait," Edward said, gesturing toward the chair across from him. "You've spent 5 years keeping this house alive. I think I deserve to know why." Maya pressed her lips together, then slowly sat down, her hands folded in her lap posture, both hesitant and proud. "I've told you before, sir. I believed you'd return. And this house, it matters." Edward furrowed his brow. "Matters to whom? To me or you?" He leaned forward, his voice lowering. "You owed me nothing. You worked here for only a few months before the accident. So why sacrifice so much? What do you want?" His question carried suspicion, and he saw a flicker of sadness cross Maya's face. She looked down, inhaled deeply, then raised her eyes, now resolute. "You want the truth? Very well. But first I want you to see something." She stood, walked to the bookshelf in the corner, and opened a small drawer. She pulled out a worn leather-bound album from it and placed it in front of him. "I made this over the past 5 years," she said, her voice low, "so you wouldn't miss the beautiful moments." Edward opened the album, his hand trembling slightly. Each page held a photo of the estate's garden through the seasons. Vibrant yellow roses in spring, golden leaves drifting in autumn, statues cloaked in winter snow. Beneath each photo, the dates were carefully recorded with short captions. Spring 2021, early bloom. Winter 2023, snow thick, but the flowers survived. 5 years. Dozens of photos. Each one is a testament to Maya's quiet, unwavering care. As he turned to the final page, a small slip of paper fell out. Edward picked it up, and his heart pounded as he read the handwritten note. "So you won't miss the beauty of life. I'll wait for you to wake up. Maya." He looked up, his gaze locking on hers. "Why?" His voice was no longer suspicious. It was desperate to understand. "Why did you do all this? You didn't know me. I might never have woken up." Maya smiled, but the smile carried pain. "I know you more than you think," she said softly but firmly. "You once built Harrington Gardens in Augusta, Georgia, a housing project for people like my mother, Lorraine Johnson. She was a single mother, raising 3 kids in a rundown apartment. When you built those homes, she had a real roof over her head for the first time. She said you didn't just give her a house, you gave her hope." Edward felt his throat tighten. Harrington Gardens, a project from his early career days when he still believed business could change lives. He remembered the thank you letters and the hugs from families, but he had buried those memories beneath the weight of Boston's high society. "Your mother," he whispered, trying to piece it together. "She passed away 6 years ago." Maya continued, her voice trembling. "Right before I started working here. She left me and my 2 younger siblings. I took this job to support them, but after your accident, I couldn't leave. I found the thank you letters in your study and the photos you kept of your community projects. I knew then you weren't just a billionaire. You were the man who gave my family a chance." A swell of emotion rose in Edward, part awe, part shame. He had thought Maya stayed for her benefit, but now he saw she had given up more than he could imagine. "You used your salary," he said, his voice cracking. "You gave up your life. For me." Maya shook her head. "Not for you, sir. For what you did. For what you stood for. And because I believe a man like you deserves to be remembered." Her words cut through the armor Edward had worn for decades. He looked back at the album, the photos now more than just images. They were a chronicle of loyalty, of belief, of a woman who had seen his truth even when he had forgotten himself. Yet doubt still lingered. In his world, no one did anything without a reason. Was Maya hiding something more? "What do you know about yellow roses?" he asked suddenly, his tone probing. Maya smiled, her eyes lighting up. "I found your mother's journal in the attic. She wrote about how you promised to plant her a yellow rose garden when you were a boy. I figured that's why you planted them here. I couldn't let them die." Edward felt his eyes sting. He had buried that promise to his mother, the most sacred thing in his life under ambition. But Maya, a stranger, had uncovered it and preserved it. He wanted to speak, but his throat closed up. "Miss Johnson," he finally managed, voice rough. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need," Maya said, rising to her feet. "I only did what I believed was right." She walked to the door, then paused, turning back to him. "If you need anything, I'll be in the garden." As she left, Edward sat there, the album still in his hands. He flipped through each page again, as if seeing fragments of himself, pieces he had long abandoned. But now a new question stirred within him. Did Maya Johnson truly stay only out of gratitude? Or was there a deeper story she had yet to tell? And if she had seen the real man beneath the power and pride, would he have the courage to face him too? Morning light streamed through the office window of the Harrington estate, casting a golden glow across the mahogany desk where Edward Harrington sat. His cane leaned against the side of his chair, though he no longer depended on it as much as before. A week had passed since his return, and while his body was slowly recovering, his mind remained trapped in a labyrinth of memories and doubts. In front of him lay Maya Johnson's photo album, images of the yellow rose garden across 5 seasons, a quiet testimony to her devotion. Yet the more he thought about Maya, the more unsettled he felt. In his world, no one did anything without a reason. Who was she really? Driven by the need for answers, Edward pushed back his chair and strolled toward the small room off the kitchen, Maya's makeshift office. He knew it was a breach of privacy, but curiosity had overpowered his guilt. The room was modest, with an old wooden desk and neatly organized bookshelves. He opened the first drawer and found maintenance bills, repair notes, and a small weather journal for tending the garden. Every detail was meticulous, as if Maya considered this house an extension of herself. The second drawer made him pause. Inside was a folder labeled in handwritten ink, Harrington. Edward opened it, and his heartbeat quickened. It wasn't paperwork about the Harrington Industries bankruptcy. These were old articles about his past social projects, affordable housing in Augusta, Georgia, and charitable programs he had once funded. Slipped between them were thank you letters from families preserved carefully in plastic sleeves. One headline caught his eye. Harrington Gardens' young millionaire transforms lives in a poor community. He remembered the ribbon cutting, the mother's smiles, the children's laughter. But he also remembered how he buried that memory, allowing pressure from Boston's elite to mold him into a colder kind of businessman. "What are you looking for?" Maya's voice startled him from the doorway. She stood there holding a grocery bag, her eyes a blend of surprise and quiet hurt. Edward's face flushed like a child caught red-handed. I'm sorry," he said, placing the folder down. "I just wanted to understand. You kept these?" Why Maya set the bag on a chair and closed the door behind her. She stepped closer, her gaze fixed on the documents. "I found them in your office while cleaning up after the accident," she said, voice low but steady. "I thought they mattered. They tell the story of who you are, not the billionaire in the headlines, but the man who built homes for people like my mother." Edward felt his throat tighten. "How much do you know about me?" he asked hoarsely. "These things, they belong to the past. I'm not that man anymore." Maya shook her head, eyes lit with unwavering conviction. "You're wrong. I've seen the security footage. Reviewing it is part of my job. I saw you late at night sitting in this office reading those letters. I saw you cry once, reading one from a single mother. You thought no one noticed, but I did. That man is still here, Mr. Harrington." Her words struck him like a blow to the chest. He remembered those nights reading silently, reminding himself that his work once had meaning. But he also remembered convincing himself that emotions were a liability, that he had to shield his heart in Boston's upper circles to survive. "You weren't supposed to see that," he said, trembling. "That wasn't your place." Maya stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "Maybe not. But when everyone else abandoned you, Nathan, Olivia, Sophia, I couldn't. I saw a man who gave my family a home, a man who kept those letters like they were treasures. I stayed because I believed he was worth protecting." A swell of emotion rose in Edward, part grief, part shame. He had doubted her and assumed she stayed for personal gain. But now, he saw she had sacrificed more than he'd ever imagined. "You gave up your life," he said, voice cracking, "for someone who might never wake up. Weren't you afraid you'd regret it?" Maya smiled, but it was a smile laced with sorrow. "Of course I was," she admitted gently. "I have 2 younger siblings in Augusta. I do this to support them. But when you fell into a coma, I couldn't walk away. My mother Lorraine always said gratitude is a debt you repay with action. She taught me that you honor it when someone gives you a chance. That's why I stayed." Edward looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time, not as an employee, but as a woman with a story. He thought of her mother and the homes in Augusta. He remembered the pride he once felt cutting that ribbon and the loneliness that followed when he returned to Boston, where his father mocked him. Kindness doesn't pay. He had let that cynicism mold him into a stranger. And yet somehow, Maya had still seen value in him. "You remind me of someone I used to be," he said quietly. "But I'm not sure that man still exists." Maya tilted her head slightly, her gaze gentle, but resolute. "He's still here, sir. You've just forgotten how to see him. These letters, that yellow rose garden, they're proof." Edward lowered his head, his fingers resting on the folder. A painful truth pressed against his chest. Maya knew him perhaps better than he knew himself, and that terrified him. If she were right, if that man still lived, he would have to face his failures, the years he traded vision for power. "Miss Johnson," he finally said, meeting her eyes, "you make me wonder If I could find that man again. Maya smiled a small smile, but one filled with hope. You woke up from a coma, sir. I think you can do anything. She turned away and picked up the grocery bag. I'll leave you alone. I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything. As she left, Edward sat silently, his hand still clutching the folder. He flipped open another letter, gratitude scrawled in uneven handwriting from a mother in Augusta. And for the first time since waking up, a faint light pierced the darkness. Not the hope of reclaiming an empire, but the hope of reclaiming himself. Yet he knew he'd have to understand Maya Johnson to do that. And perhaps learn how to trust again. In the morning at the Harrington estate, there was a strange stillness, broken only by the soft chirping of birds in the yellow rose garden. Edward Harrington sat in the drawing room, his gaze fixed on the steaming cup of Earl Grey on the table. 2 weeks had passed since his return, and he had begun adjusting to a new rhythm. Painful physical therapy sessions, sleepless nights filled with memories, and the quiet but meaningful presence of Maya Johnson. She was like a gentle breeze, never demanding attention, yet always making him feel seen. Today, however, Edward's mind was heavy. James Carter, his lawyer, had called early that morning, his voice brimming with excitement. We have the evidence, Edward James had said over the phone. Dozens of documents proving Nathan Brooks embezzled from Harrington Industries. If you agree, we can file the lawsuit and reclaim at least 60% of your assets, hundreds of millions. He won't get away with it. Not after what he did. The offer lit a fire inside Edward. Revenge on Nathan, the friend who had betrayed him and stolen the empire he built with sweat and blood, was something he had dreamed of in the early days of awakening. He imagined Nathan losing everything, being dragged through the mud by the press and imprisoned. And Olivia, the fiancée, who abandoned him to marry Nathan, would be left watching the collapse of the glittering world she had chosen. The thought made his heart race, but also brought a creeping unease. Would revenge give him what he was looking for? Edward Rose leaned on his cane and walked into the garden. Maya knelt beside the yellow roses, gently trimming dead branches. Sunlight caught the tied-back curls of her hair, casting a soft halo around her. He paused, watching her. Something about Maya, her calm, her steadiness, comforted and confused him. She had seen who he was. But did he deserve her faith? Miss Johnson? He called, voice raspy. Maya looked up and smiled softly. Yes, sir, she replied, rising and wiping her hands on her apron. Her deep brown eyes held genuine concern. Edward hesitated, then chose to speak. James just called. They have enough to sue Nathan Brooks. I could take back most of Harrington Industries and make him pay. Maya tilted her head, slightly, concern flickering in her eyes, but she didn't answer immediately. She walked toward him, adjusting her pace to match his slow steps as they strolled along the gravel path. And what do you intend to do? She asked, her voice soft, but strangely weighted, as if she knew his answer would define who he became. Edward stopped gripping his cane tightly. I don't know, he admitted, voice low. Part of me wants to destroy him. He took everything, my company, my fiancée, my future. But his gaze drifted to the yellow roses. But when I look at this garden, I think about what you've done. I wonder if revenge is really what I want. Maya smiled a small, knowing smile. Who do you want to be when it all ends, sir? She asked, her voice like a breeze cutting through the fog of his mind. The man who built homes for the poor, or the man who lives to destroy? Her question struck like a blade, sharp and precise. Edward's chest tightened. He remembered his early career when he believed wealth could bring happiness to others. But he also remembered his father's voice, a ruthless businessman who always said, "Business is war, and the weak get crushed." That pressure had turned Edward into a money-making machine, trading ideals for the image of a man Boston's elite would revere. And now, with a chance to reclaim it all within reach, he was afraid that revenge would drag him back into becoming that man again. The man Maya would never trust. "You make everything so complicated," he said, forcing a crooked smile. "You make me wonder if I could be someone else." Maya walked over to the yellow roses, plucked a single bloom, and placed it in his hand. "You already are," she said gently. "The man who planted these flowers and kept thank-you letters in his office doesn't need revenge to prove his worth." Edward looked at the rose, the soft petals brushing against his fingers. It reminded him of his mother. She once told him that kindness was strength, but he had forgotten. Maya somehow had found it and preserved it. "You know," he said, voice rough, "my father used to say kindness was weakness. He told me to be strong, to stay in control. I lived that way. And look where it got me." Maya tilted her head, her eyes glowing with quiet empathy. "My father left our family when I was young," she said, voice low. "My mother used to say true strength isn't in controlling others, but in choosing what's right, even when it's hard. I stayed here, cared for this home, not because I'm strong, but because I want to believe the good things are still worth protecting." Her words silenced Edward. For the first time, he saw Maya not just as a caretaker, as the keeper of his legacy, but as a woman shaped by her scars and beliefs. He wanted to ask more about her mother and siblings, but part of him feared that growing closer might unravel him. "Miss Johnson," he said, voice low, "if I choose revenge, what would you think of me?" Maya looked at him, not with judgment, but with honest sincerity. "I'd think you were choosing the easier path, but you can choose the harder one you began when you built Harrington Gardens." Edward smiled, a rare but honest smile. He looked at the yellow rose, then at Maya. "You make me want to try," he said softly, "but I don't know if I'm strong enough." Maya turned back toward the flowers. "You woke from a coma, sir," she said without looking back. "I think you're stronger than you know." As she disappeared into the garden, Edward remained standing there, the yellow rose still in his hand. James's proposal still echoed the chance to reclaim his empire, take down Nathan, and restore his name. But Maya's question, "Who do you want to be?" shone like a lantern on another path, a path he had never dared to walk. And for the first time, he felt himself standing at a true crossroads between a past built on power and a future that somehow Maya was beginning to draw before him. The doorbell rang through the Harrington mansion, slicing through the stillness of the autumn afternoon. Edward Harrington sat in his study, flipping through the folder Maya Johnson had once preserved thank-you letters from families at Harrington Gardens. Each handwritten note was a quiet reminder of the man he used to be. And Maya's question, "Who do you want to be?" still echoed within him. But the sharp, insistent chime of the bell yanked him back into the present. Maya, dusting in the living room, set her clothes down and went to answer the door. Edward heard her polite greeting, but then a voice he hadn't heard in years cut through the air like a blade. "Who are you to ask me anything? I'm here to see Edward. Step aside." That voice, sweet but icy, belonged to Olivia Bennet. Gripping his cane, Edward stood and made his way to the foyer. There she was, Olivia, radiant as he remembered, golden hair cascading down her shoulders, a fitted Chanel dress, and those icy blue eyes. But something in her gaze had shifted, a calculating glint he had never noticed when they were together. Across from her stood Maya, poised and still. Her deep brown eyes didn't flinch even as Olivia's voice dripped with insult. "Olivia." Edward said, his voice firm. "What are you doing here?" Olivia turned, her smile blooming, as if 5 years hadn't passed. "Edward, darling." She stepped forward to embrace him, but Edward raised his cane, stopping her. Her smile faltered, then quickly recovered. I heard you'd awakened. I had to come. You have no idea how worried I've been. Edward gave a dry laugh, the sound brittle in the vast hall. Worried. Worried enough to marry Nathan Brooks, the man who stole my company. Olivia paled, but quickly composed herself. Edward, you don't understand. It was more complicated than you think. Nathan said the company was going under, and I needed someone strong to lean on. I had no choice. Edward tilted his head, eyes cold. No choice. You chose the diamond ring and the Cape Cod estate. Don't pretend it was sacrifice. Maya remained silent nearby, her eyes flicking to Edward to ensure he was okay. But Olivia noticed her presence and narrowed her gaze. And who is she? Olivia sneered. Your new maid. Or don't tell me. Are you having some sentimental affair with a servant? Edward. Her words burned like fire, and Edward felt his blood rising. But before he could speak, Maya stepped forward, her voice calm yet cutting. I'm Maya Johnson, the woman who kept this house standing when you and everyone else abandoned Mr. Harrington. And I'm not a servant. I'm someone who works for what I believe in. Olivia laughed, sharp and grating. Believe in? Do you take me for a fool? A black woman cleaning houses, volunteering to look after a millionaire's estate. What do you want? Money? A spot in Edward's will. Edward tightened his grip on his cane, about to intervene, but Maya lifted her hand, silencing him. She looked directly at Olivia, unflinching. You want to know what I want, Maya said, her voice low but powerful. I want to ensure this world does not forget the man who gave my mother a home. I stayed for gratitude, dignity, and values you may never understand. And you, why are you here? For Mr. Harrington's last $2 million. Her words struck like a slap. Olivia stepped back, her face flushed. You dare, she began, but Edward cut her off. That's enough, Olivia, he said coldly. He stepped beside Maya, his gaze locked on the woman who had once worn his engagement ring. You have no right to insult Ms. Johnson. You chose Nathan. You chose wealth. You chose betrayal. Now leave before I call security. Olivia stared at him, her expression caught between fury and desperation. Edward, you've changed, she whispered. You used to be powerful, in control. Now you let someone like her manipulate you. Edward gave a bitter smile. No, Olivia. I'm learning to be myself for the first time in my life. And Ms. Johnson isn't manipulating me. She's reminding me who I am. Olivia turned sharply, her blonde hair sweeping behind her as she stormed out. The door slammed shut. Silence returned to the grand foyer, but the air still crackled with tension. Edward turned to Maya, gratitude and shame flickering in his eyes. You didn't have to do that, he said hoarsely. Confront her. For me. Maya shook her head gently, her gaze softening. I didn't do it for you, sir. I did it because I won't allow anyone to insult my dignity. And because... She paused, then continued. Because I believe you're worth protecting. A surge of emotion welled up inside Edward. He looked at Maya, this woman who had defended him, not for status or wealth, but because she saw something worth saving. For the first time, every doubt he'd harbored about her fell away. In its place was a deep, quiet respect. But a painful truth followed close behind. Olivia wasn't entirely wrong. Boston's elite would never welcome Maya, a black woman, a former housekeeper, into his world. And would he be brave enough to face that scrutiny? Ms. Johnson, he said, his voice low. You make me wonder if I can live up to your faith in me. Maya smiled a small smile, but radiant with hope. You don't have to live for me, sir. Live for yourself, for the man who once planted yellow roses, The man who gave my mother a home. She turned, picking up her dusting cloth. I'll be in the garden if you need me. As she walked away, Edward stood still, his eyes fixed on the door. The confrontation with Olivia had been more than a class clash, a reckoning. If he chose the path Maya believed in, he would face an unforgiving world. But when he thought of her pride, honesty, and the eyes that never judged, he felt for the first time. That is a path worth walking. The soft golden glow from an antique desk lamp cast warm light over the oak bookshelves in the Harrington Mansion library, creating a cozy haven against the crisp autumn chill. Edward Harrington sat in an armchair, a worn copy of The Count of Monte Cristo resting in his hands, but his eyes weren't on the pages. Instead, they followed Maya Johnson, who quietly arranged books in the corner of the room, her every movement graceful like a dance. Since the confrontation with Olivia Bennet the week before, Edward hadn't stopped thinking about Maya, not just for the pride she had displayed, but for how she made him want to become a better version of himself. Maya hummed a soft jazz melody, her voice light as a breeze, and Edward found himself smiling. There was something about her calmness, her sincerity, that made him feel safe, a feeling he had never known in his calculated, power-driven world. But he also understood every step closer to her was a step into the fire of Boston's upper-class prejudice. Miss Johnson. He called, his voice hoarse but warm. Maya turned, her deep brown eyes glowing under the light. Would you mind stopping for a moment? There's something I'd like to ask you. She set the book down, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked over to sit in the chair across from him. What is it, sir? She asked gently, a touch of caution in her voice, though filled with care. Edward drew a breath, his fingers brushing the book's worn cover. This book, he said, lifting it slightly. I found a bookmark inside with your handwriting. You wrote, "Reading for Mr. Harrington, August 2022. Did you read to me while I was in a coma?" Maya lowered her head, a faint blush rising on her cheeks. Yes, she admitted softly. Dr. Hayes mentioned that coma patients can sometimes hear. If you could hear, I wanted you to know you weren't forgotten. I started with The Count of Monte Cristo because it's a story about returning from ruin and reminded me of you. Edward's heart pounded. He imagined Maya sitting beside his hospital bed, reading each page aloud into the cold silence, her voice rising against the beeping of machines. The thought struck him deeply. What else did you read? He asked, his voice trembling. Maya smiled, her eyes dancing with a hint of mischief. Quite a bit. Jane Eyre. I thought you might need a story about resilience. Wuthering Heights. Though I wasn't sure how you'd feel about all the tragedy. And a few poems by Maya Angelou. I thought you'd appreciate how she writes about hope. Edward sat still, his eyes locked on her. You did all that for someone who might never wake up. Why, Maya? Why did you give so much? She hesitated, her gaze drifting to the bookshelf as if seeking the answer among the spines. I was afraid, she finally whispered, voice trembling. Afraid that if I left, the world would forget you, the man who gave my mother home and kept thank you letters like treasures. I stayed because I believed you deserved to be remembered. But, her voice faltered, her fingers tightening in her lap. But I was also afraid I was giving too much. I have 2 younger siblings in Augusta. I send money home, but I've never told you about the nights I lay awake wondering if I'm doing the right thing. Her confession hit Edward like a cold wind, awakening him to the weight of her quiet sacrifices. He had assumed she stayed out of gratitude. But now he saw a woman carrying invisible wounds and fears who still chose to stay out of belief in him. You never told me about your siblings, he said quietly. Why? Maya gave a sad smile. Because I didn't want you to think I stayed out of pity, or wanted something from you. I stayed because I saw your true self in the letters, the yellow rose garden, the nights you wept in your office, thinking no one noticed. Edward felt a sting behind his eyes. He remembered those nights reading letters from families in Augusta, holding on to them like lifelines to his fading humanity. And he remembered hiding it, fearing that compassion would be seen as weakness in the eyes of the elite. I don't deserve your faith, he whispered, voice thick. I lost that part of me, long before the coma. Maya shook her head, her gaze gentle but resolute. You didn't lose it. You just forgot how to see it. I stayed because I saw the man who planted yellow roses for his mother, the man who cried over thank you letters. That man is still here, sir. Her words felt like fire, warm and painful. Edward's heart thudded with a strange rising feeling, not just gratitude, but a profound connection. He wanted to reach out and touch her, but he stopped, feeling the invisible wall between them. Maya was a black woman, a housekeeper. He was a white millionaire, though now merely a shadow of that. The world would never forgive any intimacy between them. You scare me, he confessed, his voice rough. I'm afraid I won't be able to live up to your belief in me. I'm afraid this world won't accept whatever this is between us. Maya looked at him, her eyes trembling with the same truth. I'm scared too, she whispered. Scared that if I feel too much, I'll lose myself. I'm your employee, sir. And the world out there will never let us forget that. Her words cut deep, but Edward didn't retreat. I don't care what the world thinks, he said, his voice stronger than expected. You gave me a reason to wake up, Maya. Not for money, not for power, but because you saw something in me I'd forgotten. Maya rose and walked back to the bookshelf, her hands shaking slightly as she pretended to rearrange the volumes. You need time, sir, she said, her voice carefully composed. And I need to protect my heart. As she left the library, Edward remained seated, the Count of Monte Cristo still in his hand. For the first time, he saw the truth perfectly. He didn't just want to find his old self. He wanted to become the man worthy of Maya. But to do that, he would have to face the world and the deepest fears within himself. Morning sunlight filtered through the leaves of the Harrington estate garden, casting a warm glow over the yellow roses, radiant like little flames. Edward Harrington stood at the living room window, leaning on his cane, eyes fixed on Maya Johnson working outside. She wore a deep blue sweater, her curly hair tied back neatly, her hands gently tending to each rose branch. Since that evening in the library, Maya's confession about her fierce siblings and the walls society built around her still echoed in Edward's mind. She wasn't just the woman who had preserved his legacy. She was the one who made him want to become a better version of himself. But today, Edward faced a choice far greater than any before. The phone on the table buzzed, and the name James Carter appeared on the screen. Edward took a deep breath, knowing this call would shape his future. He picked it up, voice low and steady. James, go ahead. James's voice was electric. Edward, we've got everything we need to take Nathan Brooks down. With this evidence, we can reclaim 60% of Harrington Industries' hundreds of millions. He won't walk away from this. We need your signature on the authorization, and we're moving forward. Edward's heartbeat quickened. The thought of destroying Nathan, the man who had stolen his empire, married Olivia, and made him a laughingstock among Boston's elite, burned like wildfire in his chest. But then his gaze drifted back to the garden, to Maya, humming quietly as she focused on pruning the yellow roses. Her question in the library returned to him like a wind snuffing out a flame. Who do you want to be? I need time, James. Edward said, his voice firm. Don't do anything until I decide. James hesitated. Edward, this is your shot. Don't let emotions cloud your judgment. You know Nathan deserves this. Edward gave a bitter smile. I know, but I'm not sure I want to be the one holding the knife anymore. He ended the call and turned back to Maya. He knew now this decision wasn't just about Nathan. It was about who he wanted to become, not just for himself, but for her. He steadied his cane and stepped out into the garden. Maya looked up at the sound of his footsteps and smiled gently. You're out early today, sir, she said, wiping her hands on her apron. Is something the matter? Edward paused, drawing in the cool morning air. I just spoke to James. They have everything they need to sue Nathan and recover most of the company. But I'm not sure I want to go through with it. Maya tilted her head, curiosity flickering in her eyes. Why not, she asked, voice soft but weighty. That's what you built. It's your legacy. Edward shook his head, eyes sweeping over the golden roses. I used to think that too. But you've shown me a different legacy, this garden. Those thank you letters, the homes I helped build in Augusta. If I sue Nathan, I return to the old path, power, revenge. And I don't want to be that man anymore. Maya looked at him, eyes wavering between surprise and something more profound. You're giving up everything, she whispered. Aren't you afraid you'll regret it? Edward smiled, one of the rare sincere ones. I am afraid, but I'm more fearful of losing myself. You kept the real me alive for 5 years, Maya. I want to live in a way that honors that. Maya lowered her head, her hands trembling slightly. I don't know what to say, she whispered. I just wanted you to find yourself again. But the world out there, they won't readily accept this choice. They've already started talking. Edward frowned. Talking? Maya hesitated, then pulled a neatly folded tabloid from her pocket. She handed it to him, her eyes filled with quiet worry. He unfolded it. The headline hit him like a slap. Millionaire Harrington and his mysterious maid love or manipulation. The article oozed with poisonous speculation, branding Maya a gold digger and suggesting she exploited Edward during his weakest hour. Edward clenched the paper, fury rushing to his face. They don't know anything about you, he said, voice trembling with anger. They don't know what you've sacrificed. Maya shook her head, eyes sad but resolute. They don't need to. To them, I'm just a black maid. And you're a white millionaire. They'll never accept anything between us. Her words cut deep, but Edward didn't flinch. They don't decide my life, he said, voice steady. And they don't decide who I'm allowed to cherish. Maya looked at him as if battling something within herself. You don't understand, she said gently. I've lived my whole life under those stairs. I'm not afraid for me. I'm so scared for you. Afraid that one day you'll regret walking this road. Edward stepped closer, narrowing the space between them. You gave me a chance to start over, he said, his voice low but full of feeling. Let me do something for you, not to repay you, but to prove that I believe in this path. He pointed to a corner of the garden where the soil had been freshly turned. Let's plant a new yellow rose together, he said. Not to remember the past, but to mark a beginning. Maya looked at him, eyes bright with unspoken emotion. She nodded, and they began to work. They dug, placed the roots, and covered the soil, each motion a quiet vow. When they stood dirt on both hands, Edward looked at her and felt his heart pound. You know, he said gently, this rose, it's ours, not the world's. Maya smiled, radiant yet cautious. Thank you, she whispered, but you must be sure, because once you walk this path, there's no turning back. Edward met her gaze without hesitation. "I am sure," he said, "and I'll prove it not just to you, but myself." As Maya returned to her work, Edward remained still, his eyes fixed on the newly planted yellow rose. He knew turning away from revenge would make him a target of whispers, that the tabloid was only the beginning. But as he looked at Maya, he saw one thing with absolute clarity. This path, however difficult, was the only one worth taking. The pale sunlight of an October afternoon filtered through the windows of the Harrington estate, casting a warm golden glow across the wooden floor. Edward Harrington sat in his study, turning over a thank-you letter from a family at Harrington Gardens, though his mind wandered. The decision to drop the lawsuit against Nathan Brooks had brought a strange relief, but also left a void, a question of how he would now build the future. Maya Johnson was tending to the yellow roses in the garden, and Edward smiled as he caught her humming a jazz tune. She hadn't just preserved this house, she had become the light guiding him forward. The doorbell rang, cutting through his thoughts. Maya, who was in the living room, put down her clothes and went to answer them. Edward heard her greet someone, but then a trembling voice froze him in place. I need to see Edward. I'm Sophia." That voice, fragile but unmistakably familiar, belonged to his sister Sophia Harrington. Edward leaned on his cane and stepped into the hall. At the door stood Sophia, no longer the proud girl he remembered. Her brown hair was disheveled, her eyes swollen from crying, and her expensive coat couldn't conceal the weariness in her frame. Maya stood beside her, glancing at Edward as if silently asking if he was all right. "Sophia," Edward said, his voice colder than he intended. "What are you doing here?" Sophia bowed her head, her hands twisted tightly together. "Edward, brother," she whispered, "I'm sorry. I came to ask for your forgiveness." Edward felt a tightness in his chest. He remembered the day James Carter told him Sophia had sold her shares in Harrington Industries shortly after Nathan seized power, abandoning him to live in luxury in Dubai. That betrayal had cut deeper than Olivia's because Sophia was blood someone he had once vowed to protect forever. "Forgiveness," he echoed, his tone bitter. "You left me, Sophia. You chose money. You chose Dubai. You chose a life without me." Sophia broke down, tears running down her cheeks. "I know," she sobbed. "I was wrong. Nathan told me the company was collapsing, and that selling the shares was the only way to salvage anything. I was scared, Edward. I always leaned on you, and when you fell into a coma, I didn't know what to do." Edward gripped his cane tightly, his eyes sharp. "You could have waited for me to wake up. You could have fought for the company for me, but you ran." Maya, who had been standing silently nearby, stepped forward. "I'll make some tea," she offered gently, but Edward raised a hand to stop her. "No, Maya, you're a part of this. My sister must know who kept this house alive when she left." Sophia looked at Maya, her eyes full of curiosity and shame. "You're Maya Johnson?" she asked, voice trembling. "The one who cared for everything while I wasn't here?" Maya nodded, her gaze calm and free of judgment. "I only did what I believed was right," she said softly. "This house was Mr. Harrington's legacy. I couldn't let it be lost." Sophia lowered her head again, tears falling anew. "I don't deserve forgiveness," she said, turning to Edward. "But I needed to tell you. Dubai, it's beautiful but hollow. I married someone I don't love. I've lived at parties I don't belong to. I miss you, Edward. I miss the brother who always protected me even when I didn't deserve it." A wave of emotion surged through Edward, anger, pain, and a faint thread of compassion. He thought of their childhood, when he shielded Sophia from their father's harshness. Their father always said Sophia was weak and that she would never stand on her own. And Edward, by providing everything, had unintentionally made that prophecy real. "You proved father right," he said hoarsely. You chose the easy way instead of fighting. Sophia sobbed uncontrollably, but then Maya stepped beside Edward, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Sir, she said, her voice soft yet resolute. Sometimes the ones who hurt us the most are the ones most need forgiveness. Not to erase the past, but to give them and yourself a chance to begin again. Her words passed through him like wind, softening the storm within. He looked at her, and her eyes shone with a compassion he'd never seen in anyone else. He thought of the day he gave up vengeance against Nathan, the new path Maya had inspired. If only he could forgive Nathan by letting the law deal with him. Couldn't he also forgive his sister? Edward drew a deep breath and turned to Sophia. You hurt me, he said, his voice steady, no longer cold. But I don't want to lose you forever. Christmas is coming. If you're willing, come back. Maybe we can start again. Sophia looked up, eyes gleaming with hope. You mean it? She asked, trembling. After everything I've done? Edward nodded, his gaze drifting toward Maya. I'm learning to open doors, Sophia. Not because you deserve it, but because I want to be better. Sophia rushed forward and threw her arms around him, sobbing into his shirt. Thank you, she whispered. I promise I won't let you down again. When Sophia left, promising to return for Christmas, Edward and Maya remained in the hallway. He looked at her, his eyes full of gratitude. You make me better, Maya, he said, voice husky. I don't know who I'd be without you. Maya smiled, though a flicker of worry crossed her eyes. I just want you to find yourself, she said. But be careful. Forgiving your sister is one thing. The world out there won't forgive who you're becoming so easily. Edward knew what she meant, the tabloid story, the judgmental stares of the elite. He stepped closer, closing the space between them. They don't get to decide my life, he said firmly. You gave me a reason to live, Maya. I won't let them take that from me. Maya looked at him, her eyes wavering as if torn by an invisible struggle. I hope you're right, she murmured, then turned away to return to her work. But Edward knew at that moment an invisible thread had bound them, one stronger than prejudice, stronger than the past, stronger than anything the outside world could wield. The Harrington estate shimmered under the glow of thousands of Christmas lights, transforming the garden of yellow roses into a sparkling tapestry beneath the winter night. Inside, the grand living room was filled with the scent of pine wood and red wine, laughter mingling with soft jazz music. Edward Harrington, dressed in a deep blue suit, stood near the fireplace, his eyes scanning the crowd. Old friends, a few loyal partners, and his sister Sophia, newly returned from Dubai. But his thoughts rested on only one person, Maya Johnson. In a simple yet elegant crimson velvet dress, Maya moved gracefully among the guests, ensuring everything was just right. She had declined to sit at the main dining table, insisting she was still staff, but Edward had firmly disagreed. You are not just staff, Maya, he'd said before the party began. You're the reason this house still feels like home. She reluctantly agreed, but her eyes betrayed a quiet worry, as if she knew Boston's high society would not accept her so easily. The evening began in warm spirits. James Carter, Edward's attorney, raised a toast to his return, and Sophia shared awkward tales from Dubai, trying to reconnect. Yet Edward noticed the glances, subtle side eyes, as Maya passed, whispered comments referencing the tabloid that had labeled her an opportunist. He tightened his grip on his wine glass, silently resolving that tonight would be more than a celebration. It would be a declaration. He would no longer let prejudice dictate his life. Edward rose and gently tapped his glass to gather attention as dessert was served. Thank you all for coming, he began, his voice deep and firm. Tonight, isn't just Christmas. It's a new beginning. 5 years in a coma taught me something true. Worth isn't in wealth or power. It's in the people who stand by you when everything else falls apart. His gaze turned to Maya, and his tone softened. There is someone who not only kept this house alive, but kept me alive. She tended the yellow rose garden, saved every thank you letter, and read aloud to me when I couldn't hear. Her name is Maya Johnson, and I want everyone here to know I love her, not as an employer loves an employee, but as a man loves the woman who saved his soul. The room fell silent. Then slowly applause began, led by Sophia and James. But Edward also saw cold stares and furrowed brows. Maya stood still, hands clenched, her eyes flickering between emotion and fear. She bowed her head, as if trying to hide the tears welling up. Suddenly the main door swung open, and a sharp voice rang. How touching! Edward Olivia Bennett swept into the room, uninvited, her sequin dress glittering under the lights. But are you sure you're not just blinded by gratitude for a maid taking advantage of your kindness? Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and Edward felt heat surge in his veins. Maya went pale but stood tall, her eyes locking with Olivia's. Mrs. Bennett, Maya said, voice calm but razor sharp. You weren't invited, and you have no right to judge what you don't understand. Olivia laughed high and grating. Understand? I understand better than you think, girl. Is a black maid clinging to a millionaire just out of a coma? Do you think you can belong in our world? You're a joke. Edward stepped forward, positioning himself in front of Maya, his eyes blazing. Olivia, that's enough, he said coldly. You chose Nathan. You chose wealth. You chose betrayal. Maya did what you never dared to do. She stayed when I had nothing. She has a dignity you'll never comprehend. Before Olivia could respond, Sophia unexpectedly rose to her feet, her voice shaky but unwavering. That's enough, Olivia, Sophia said, her eyes aflame. You have no right to judge Maya. She saved my brother, not just this house, but him. Do you even know what love is? No, because all you care about is advantage. Sophia's words struck like lightning. Olivia stumbled, her face reddening. The room was dead silent. Olivia looked around and saw no allies. Without a word, she turned and stormed out in disgrace. Edward turned to Maya, his eyes filled with concern. Are you all right? He asked, voice rough. Maya nodded, though her hands were still trembling. I didn't expect you to say all that, she whispered. In front of everyone. Edward took her hands, uncaring of the stares around them. I had to, he said, voice steady, because you taught me that true worth lies in honesty. I love you, Maya, and I want the whole world to know. Maya looked up at him, tears now streaming down her cheeks. Aren't you afraid? She asked, voice trembling. The world out there, they won't let us be. Edward smiled, a strong, unwavering smile. They can say what they want, but they don't decide my heart. You are the truest thing I've ever known, and I won't lose you. The applause rose again, stronger this time, led by James and Sophia. A few guests slipped away, their expressions cold. But Edward didn't care. He pulled Maya into his arms, holding her close in the winter chill. That Christmas night wasn't just a party, it was a declaration. That their love was more substantial than every prejudice, every barrier, every past. New Year's sunlight pierced through a thin layer of snow, turning the garden of the Harrington estate into a shimmering canvas of 1,000 diamonds. Edward Harrington rose early, a habit formed since leaving the hospital, and stepped into the small glass conservatory attached to the house. Inside, Maya Johnson was tending to a delicate yellow rose, a quiet experiment to coax it to bloom out of season, a silent promise she'd made to Edward's late mother. He stood still watching her, her curly hair tied back her gentle hands, caressing the petals, and that soft smile, light as dawn. After Christmas Eve, when he had declared his love publicly to the world, Edward knew Maya wasn't just the woman who had saved him. She was his future. Today, he carried a decision weightier than letting go of revenge against Nathan Brooks or forgiving Sophia. In the pocket of his tailored vest sat a small velvet box, heavy with the promise he'd contemplated through sleepless nights. He took a deep breath and stepped into the conservatory, his shoes barely echoing on the stone floor. Maya looked up, her deep brown eyes lighting up. "You're up early this morning, sir," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Is something wrong?" Edward smiled, his eyes never leaving her. "Call me Edward, Maya," he said in a low, steady voice. "After everything, I think we've outgrown formalities." Maya smiled faintly, her cheeks tinged pink. "All right, Edward." She turned back to the rose, perhaps to hide her fluster. "This one's blooming. I thought it might make a gift for your mother, if she were still with us." Her words made Edward's heart tighten. He thought of his mother, the woman who had taught him that kindness was strength, and of Maya, who had kept that belief alive when he had forgotten it himself. "You always find ways to make things meaningful," he said, stepping closer. "But today, I want to do something for you." Maya turned back, eyes curious. Edward pulled the velvet box from his pocket and placed it gently on the wooden table in the center of the conservatory. Her hands trembled slightly, as if she already sensed what it contained. "Edward," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What is this?" He opened the box, revealing an exquisite gold ring, a small yellow rose, sculpted in precious metal, its petals set with diamonds, glistening like dew. "It was made just for you," he said, his voice deep with emotion. "This yellow rose is our story. You kept it alive for 5 years through harsh winters and silent seasons. The dewdrops, they're the tears we've both shed. And this beauty, it's the love we've built." Maya covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Edward, you don't have to do this," she choked. "Out there, they won't forgive us. I'm your housekeeper. I'm a black woman. They'll call this a mistake." Edward stepped forward and took her hand, still warm, still carrying the scent of soil and devotion. "I've lived too long by their rules," he said, voice firm. 5 years in a coma taught me that life is too short for fear. You stayed when I had nothing. Maya, you loved the man I was, even when I didn't know who that was. I'm not proposing because I need someone to care for this house. You've already done that better than anyone. I'm proposing because I want to spend the rest of my life earning your love." Maya looked at him, tears shimmering in the golden light. "Are you sure?" she asked, voice shaking. "Because if you choose me, there's no turning back. The world will come for us." Edward smiled, unwavering. "I've never been more sure. Let the world say what it wants, it doesn't own my heart. You are the truest thing I've ever known, and I won't lose you." Maya burst into tears, but nodded, her radiant smile breaking through. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Edward. For every morning I woke to tend your roses. For every night I read hoping you could hear. For the man I've always believed in, the man standing before me now." Edward slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit as if it had always belonged there. He pulled her into his arms, pressed a kiss to her forehead, and felt the warmth of her body, the rhythm of her heart merge with his own. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the garden in white purity. But inside the conservatory, a yellow rose bloomed out of season, like a blessing upon their love. As they left the conservatory, Edward took Maya's hand, a bright gleam in his eyes. "I want us to build something together," he said. "Not just a wedding. I want to start a foundation, to build homes for families like your mother's, like those in Harrington Gardens. That will be our legacy." Maya looked at him, her eyes glowing. "My mother would be so proud," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And I'm proud of you." Edward smiled and pulled her into another embrace. "We saved each other, Maya," he whispered. "Now we'll save the world, one home at a time." They stood there, hands intertwined, amid a snow-covered garden, knowing the road ahead would not be easy. Boston's elite would continue to whisper. Tabloids would spin their stories. But their love, like the yellow rose blooming out of season, was stronger than any judgment. And their story closed with a question for all who watched. Between a financial empire and true love, which would you choose, and why?